You know the Sunset Showdowns, the heroes in hats and badges who always win in the end. Hollywood spent decades selling that version, but the real sheriffs of the Old West died betrayed, drunk, in their nightshirts, shot in the back, or simply in bed, forgotten. Here are 20 stories the movies never had the guts to tell. Number 1. Pat Garrett. The guy who killed Billy the Kid in 881 wasn't some movie gunslinger. He was the sheriff of Lincoln County, New Mexico, and it took him months to track down the most wanted outlaw in the territory. After that, he became a kind of local celebrity and even wrote a book telling the story of the hunt. But fame didn't pay the bills. Garrett went through ups and downs, worked as a tax collector, tried to get back into public life, and got pulled into an ugly fight over land. In February 1908, at 57, he was stopped on the side of a desert road when he was shot in the back. The accused said it was self-defense. The jury bought it and cleared the man in less than 15 minutes, even though the bullet went in from behind. To this day, nobody knows for sure who really ordered the hit on the sheriff who took down Billy the Kid. Number 2. Bill Tillman. Bat Masterson once said Tillman was the greatest of all of us, and Masterson knew everybody in that world. Tillman worked in law enforcement for 51 years. He was a scout, a buffalo hunter, a sheriff, a state senator, and he even made a movie about the Old West. Over his career, he arrested more than 300 fugitives in Dodge City, Oklahoma, and other places. He wasn't the fastest guy on the draw. He was the most stubborn. He just wouldn't quit. In 1924, already 70 years old, he came out of retirement because the town of Cromwell, Oklahoma, was overrun with bootleggers during Prohibition. Somebody had to deal with it. The night he tried to arrest Wiley Lynn, a drunk federal Prohibition agent, Lynn pulled his gun and shot him. Tillman died right there. The man who survived decades facing gunfighters and killers was taken down by a corrupt government employee from the very government he'd served his whole life. Number 3. Henry Plummer. In 1863, this guy pulled off something most outlaws wouldn't even dream of. He got elected sheriff of Bannock, Montana, at a time when gold was drawing all kinds of people to the region. The problem was that while Plummer wore the badge on his chest, a violent gang was robbing miners and travelers on the roads. Folks started suspecting the sheriff himself was running the holdups. Nobody took it to trial. In January 1864, a group of vigilantes decided to take justice into their own hands. In a few weeks, they hanged more than 20 men. Plummer was one of them. And here's the chilling detail. He was strung up on the same gallows he'd had built when he took office. To this day, historians argue over whether he was actually guilty or just a scapegoat. The crowd needed to cool things down. Number 4. Wyatt Earp. Before he became the most famous sheriff of the Old West, Earp had run-ins with the law for horse theft and even worked in brothels in Illinois. Not exactly the stuff you read in school books. In 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona, he took part in the gunfight at the OK Corral, a showdown that lasted about 30 seconds and changed American history. But here's the detail most people don't know. Earp spent the last few decades of his life in Los Angeles, hanging around Hollywood sets, trying to convince directors to tell his story the right way. He never made a dime off it. He died in 1929, at 80, in his own bed. At the funeral, the actor Tom Mix was seen crying. The man who survived dozens of shootouts died of natural causes, something hardly anyone from his time managed to do. Number 5. Bat Masterson. Dodge City in the 1870s was the kind of place where a man could get shot just for sitting in the wrong chair in a saloon. Bat Masterson kept order there when keeping order meant risking your life every single day. He went up against gunfighters, arrested outlaws, and lived through shootouts that left other men on the ground. But what he did afterward is the part nobody expects. He hung up the badge, took a train to New York, and started writing about boxing for the New York Morning Telegraph. The guy became a sports writer. In October 1921, at 67, he was in the newsroom writing yet another column when he had a heart attack and died right there, pen in hand. The last sentence he wrote was about betting. The man who survived Dodge City was taken out by a heart attack in an office in Manhattan. Number 6. Wild Bill Hickok. Hickok was a sheriff in towns like Hays City and Abilene, Kansas, where he kept packed saloons full of armed cowboys in line through sheer intimidation. But he made a mistake he never got over. During a chaotic shootout, he accidentally killed his own deputy. That changed everything. In his last years, he was living off poker in Deadwood, South Dakota. And he had one rule he never broke. He always sat facing the door. On August 2nd, 1996, for some reason, he broke that rule for the first time. Jack McCall, a guy he'd humiliated at the poker table the night before, walked into the saloon and shot him in the back of the head without saying a word. When Hickok collapsed, the cards fell from his hand. 2 pairs, aces, and eights. To this day, that combo in poker is called the dead man's hand. And every player who gets it feels a chill down their spine. Numero 7. John Slaughter. This guy was under 5'7", tall, and still made seasoned outlaws think twice before crossing his path. Slaughter started out as a Texas Ranger and later became sheriff of Cochise County, Arizona, one of the most violent regions on the American frontier. His way of doing the job wasn't complicated. He figured it was more practical to take fugitives out than to arrest them. He set up a network of informants along the Mexican border and used carefully planned ambushes to wipe out gangs of cattle rustlers and killers operating in the area. The surprising part is how the story ends. While most lawmen of that era died from gunshots or knife wounds, Slaughter passed away peacefully in 1902 at age 81 on his own ranch in Arizona. He lived long enough to see the Old West turn into entertainment in Hollywood, but ironically, never got a movie worthy of him. Number 8. Fred White. Tombstone, Arizona, in 1880, wasn't the legend we know today yet. It was just another mining town packed with armed people and short fuses. Fred White was the first man to take the sheriff's badge there, a job no sensible person wanted. One October night, he tried to disarm Curly Bill Brocious, a cowboy who was drunk and causing trouble. When White grabbed the revolver, it went off and hit him in the abdomen. Wyatt Earp, who was nearby, dropped Brocious with a pistol whip to the head. White lingered for 2 days, but here comes the part nobody expected. Before he died, he said the shot had been an accident and asked for Brocious to be released. The man who got shot forgave the one who pulled the trigger. White served less than a year as sheriff and never knew Tombstone would become the most famous town in the Old West. Number 9. Dallas Staudenmeier. In 881, El Paso was seen as one of the most dangerous towns on the frontier. When Staudenmeier took over as marshal, he didn't waste any time. In his first 4 days on the job, he killed 4 men. One of them wasn't even involved in anything, just a guy unlucky enough to be walking down the street at the wrong time. The town cheered at first. He was really cleaning up El Paso. But there was one problem nobody could fix: drinking. Alcohol started taking over, and his behavior got unpredictable. Fights, chaos, pointless decisions. El Paso ended up firing its own marshal. Months later, in September 1882, Staudenmeier came back drunk to a saloon to settle scores with old enemies. He took 3 shots, but still managed to kill one of the shooters before he dropped dead. He ended exactly how he started, in the middle of a shootout. Number 10. Elfego Baca. In 1884, a 19-year-old kid in New Mexico decided he was going to enforce the law in a lawless town. The problem was, he didn't have a badge, and he didn't have permission from anyone. El Fuego Baca simply arrested a cowboy who had been terrorizing local residents. The reaction was immediate. About 80 cowboys surrounded the adobe house, where Baca took cover, demanding the prisoner. What followed lasted 33 hours. Historians estimate that more than 4,000 shots were fired at that building. When it was all over, Baca walked out, without a scratch. After that, he built a career as a sheriff and a lawyer. He lived to be 80 and died in 1945 in Albuquerque of natural causes. The guy who faced 4,000 bullets ended his life settling disputes in a courtroom, not in a shootout. Number 11, Ben Thompson. This guy was the Marshal of Austin, Texas, and at the same time one of the most feared card players in the West. He kept the city in line, but he lived between two worlds. In March 1884, Thompson and his partner King Fisher went to a theater in San Antonio, supposedly to see a show. But it was a setup. When they got there, gunmen hiding nearby opened fire from several angles at once. More than 14 shots were fired. Thompson went down right there, with no chance to react. The detail that stands out is that nobody was ever convicted for the murder. The man who kept all of Austin under control with an iron grip was taken out in an ambush by people who knew they'd never win in a face-to-face showdown. They chose to shoot from the shadows. Number 12, John Selman. In 1890, the most dangerous gunslinger in Texas, John Wesley Hardin, was shooting dice in an El Paso saloon. Hardin had already killed more than 40 men. Nobody dared face him head on. But John Selman didn't have to. A town constable, Selman simply walked into the saloon and shot him in the back. Hardin dropped dead before he even understood what happened. Selman said it was self-defense. The town accepted his story without question. But sooner or later, the bill always comes due. Less than a year later, Selman got into a fight with Deputy U.S. Marshal George Scarborough during a card game. Things heated up and Scarborough drew first, 4 shots. Selman was rushed into surgery, but he didn't make it. The man who took down the most feared gunslinger in Texas died the exact same way he killed, shot without warning, with no chance to react. Number 13, Heck Thomas. While most marshals back then died young, Heck Thomas simply refused to stop. He was one of the so-called 3 guardsmen of Oklahoma, alongside Bill Tillman and Chris Madsen, 3 men who basically forced the Indian Territory into line. Thomas hunted down members of the Dalton Gang, tracked fugitives nobody else wanted to chase, and in 1896 he cornered and killed Bill Doolin, the gang leader who had Oklahoma wide awake at night. The most impressive part? He survived all of it. No bullet took him down, and no outlaw managed to get him. But decades of riding horseback under sun and rain took their toll in a different way. Thomas died in 1912 at 61 in Lawton, Oklahoma, from kidney problems. His body just gave out after a whole life being pushed to the limit. Number 14, Harry Wheeler. This guy was the last captain of the Arizona Rangers and later became sheriff of Cochise County. And it wasn't just a figurehead job. Wheeler lived through some of the last real gunfights of the Old West. In 1904, he faced a fugitive inside a saloon in Tucson and killed the guy in a face-to-face duel. 3 years later, in Benson, he got shot, but still took down his opponent. But the heaviest episode of his career didn't involve a revolver. In 1917, Wheeler organized the forced deportation of more than 1,200 striking miners in Bisbee, Arizona. He packed those men into train cars and dumped everyone out in the middle of the desert. He was charged with kidnapping, but he was never convicted of anything. After surviving duels and shootouts, Wheeler died in 1925 of tuberculosis. The same disease that took out a whole generation of men in the West ended up doing what no bullet ever could. Number 15. Henry Newton Brown. Not many people know this, but this guy rode alongside Billy the Kid during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico. He took part in real shootouts against the law. Then, in a way nobody expected, he crossed over to the other side and became marshal in Caldwell, Kansas. And he wasn't just any marshal. He turned that violent town into a place where families could walk around in peace. People trusted him completely. But in 1884, the low pay squeezed him too hard. Brown and 3 partners crossed the state line and tried to rob a bank in Medicine Lodge. Everything went wrong. They were arrested on the spot. That same night, an angry mob broke into the jail. Brown tried to run for it, but he didn't get far. He died at 27, shot by the very same people who would have once cheered his courage. Number 16. Jack Hayes. This guy was a captain in the Texas Rangers, the first sheriff of San Francisco, and one of the men who literally changed how people fought in the American West. He was the one who proved you could use Colt revolvers on horseback in real combat, a tactic nobody had tried before. That turned the Rangers into a force no enemy expected to face. Later, he was sent to San Francisco, right at the height of the gold rush, when the city blew up from 1,000 to 100,000 people in 2 years. Imagine keeping order in a place like that. After that, he left law enforcement, got into politics, invested in land, and got rich. He died peacefully in 1883 at 65 on his own ranch in California. Maybe the reason almost nobody knows his name today is exactly that. He didn't die in a shootout, and he wasn't murdered. And in the Old West, apparently, surviving is the worst thing you can do for your own fame. Number 17. Dave Allison. At just 27, this guy became the youngest sheriff in Texas history, taking over Midland County when most men were still trying to figure out what to do with their lives. And he didn't stop there. He was re-elected 6 straight times. Later, he joined the Arizona Rangers, where he hunted dangerous fugitives like Bravo Juan Bose, and took out Three Finger Jack, a train robber known around the area. In 1915, he's credited with killing the Mexican revolutionary Pascual Orozco. But Dave Allison's end came in the most treacherous way possible. In April 1923, in Seminole, New Mexico, he and a partner were called in to mediate a land dispute between 2 groups. It seemed like it was just going to be talk, until it turned into an ambush. The 2 were shot and killed by the very people involved in the dispute. Allison was 61 and had more than 3 decades of serving the law. He died in a situation that seemed under control, until it wasn't. Number 18. Tom Logan. In Nye County, Nevada, in the early 1900s, there was a sheriff the newspapers of the time called the quietest and most efficient man in the region. Tom Logan didn't put on a show, and he didn't go around looking for trouble. He just did his job. One night in 1906, Logan was woken up with news that a pro gambler named Walter Barriot was causing problems at a local brothel. Logan rushed out of the house in his nightshirt without even grabbing his gun. When he got there, Barriot pulled his revolver and fired 5 times. Logan died right there. What happened next is hard to swallow. Barriot went to trial and claimed self-defense against an unarmed man in sleeping clothes, and the jury acquitted him. In an Old West full of legendary shootouts, this sheriff died simply trying to break up a fight. Number 19. Virgil Earp. Everybody knows Wyatt Earp, but the one who really ran the shootout at the OK Corral was his older brother, Virgil. He was Tombstone's chief of police. He was the one with the badge and the legal authority to act that day in October 881. Wyatt was just a civilian helping out. 2 months later, the Cowboys got revenge. They ambushed Virgil in a dark alley with shotguns. He survived, but he never properly used his left arm again. He spent years bouncing from town to town trying to start over. None of them worked out like Tombstone. He died in 1905 in a mining town in Nevada at 62 from pneumonia. The man who actually led the most famous showdown of the Old West ended up basically forgotten, while his younger brother became a legend. Number 20. Chris Madsen. This guy was born in Denmark in 851. By 19, he was already on the battlefield in the Franco-Prussian War. Then he crossed the Atlantic, enlisted in the U.S. 5th Cavalry, and fought the Sioux in the Western campaigns. But his story was far from over. Madsen became a deputy U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma, and for decades hunted the territory's worst fugitives alongside Bill Tillman and Heck Thomas. The three became known as the Three Guardsmen. Now here's the part that really hits. Tillman was shot to death. Thomas died worn down by illness. Madsen, he survived it all. 2 wars in Europe, Indian Wars, shootouts in the Old West. He never took a single bullet. He lived until 1944, reaching 92 years old in Guthrie, Oklahoma. The man watched World War II happening from his window after living through pretty much all the violence the century had to offer.